Morning, everybody. My name is Jessica Bell. I'm the MPP for University Rosedale. I'm joined by my colleagues MPP Bhutila, Karpoche and MPP Terence Kernahan, as well as tenants and housing advocates from across Toronto. The goal, this is what we want. We want to ensure that everyone in Ontario lives in a safe and affordable home that meets their needs. That is not the reality today. We have a terrible affordable housing crisis across Ontario. We have upwards of 10,000 people who are homeless and sleeping on couches, in tents, and in shelters because they cannot afford rent. We have 1.4 million renter households, and many of them are paying rent that's too expensive for them. They're paying over 30% of their income on rent. And we have a sharp rise in evictions, including illegal evictions. And when someone is evicted, they are forced out to look for an apartment that is incredibly expensive. In Toronto today, a two-bedroom apartment costs over $2,700. You need to be earning over $100,000 a year in order to afford that apartment. That is outrageously expensive, and our city has become too expensive for the people that run this city, from our students to our paramedics. This government has not been a friend to renters. They have made it easier to evict tenants who are struggling. They are increasing rent starting next year on all tenants who live in rent-controlled apartments, and they have eliminated rent control on new buildings. So when you walk down the street and see a new development, you'll see that the price for that new home is upwards of $3,000 a month. An everyday person cannot afford that. And this government has sat and watched idly as investors have made a mint on this housing market, while renters and first-time home buyers have been forced to sit on the sidelines because they can't afford to make it work anymore. The reason why we are here today is because we will be introducing our bill, the Rent Stabilization Act, to make rent affordable and stable for tenants all across Ontario. And this is part of our comprehensive plan to make housing affordable for everyone. And our comprehensive plan includes clamping down on speculation, building more affordable homes and new homes to meet the need, and bringing in better protections for renters. That is why we are here today. I'm going to be handing it over to MPP Bhutila Karpoche to explain the bill in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. We have a cost of living crisis, and housing is a big part of it. Rents are becoming so unaffordable, especially in cities like Toronto. Tenants simply cannot afford to live, are barely just able to keep a roof over their heads. And making things worse, tenants are being evicted illegally, rent-evicted, in bad faith for unfair reasons. So why is this happening? In 1996, Conservative Premier Mike Harris introduced vacancy decontrol. This is a mechanism that allows landlords to raise the rent with no limit when a unit becomes vacant, thus creating an incentive for landlords to kick tenants out through any means so that a unit becomes vacant. It has real impacts on people like my constituents, Teresa, a senior, and her disabled son, Anthony, who live at 1251 King Street West. They lived in their apartment for over 30 years and always paid their rent on time. But then their landlord suddenly tried to evict them on issues of cleanliness. Or the tenants of 130 Jameson, who lived in their buildings for a decade and were recently served an eviction notice for their use of ACs during a heat wave. Tenant groups and community organizations have been pushing for action on this for decades. From Parkdale High Park today, we have representatives from Parkdale Tenants Association, Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, High Park Tenants Association, Parkdale People's Economy, and so many others. Groups and tenants have advocated for a bill like this. But for almost 3 decades, Liberal and Conservative governments have refused to fix this loophole, which is a major driver for skyrocketing rent. This is why we're announcing today the tabling of the Rent Stabilization Act. This bill will stabilize rent and end the incentive for shady and illegal evictions and rent evictions. It will also amend the Residential Tenancies Act to require that the Landlord and Tenant Board to create and maintain a rent registry so tenants can feel confident in knowing that they are not being gouged on rent. Tenants cannot afford to live with the fear of unfair and illegal evictions and skyrocketing rents, and Ontario cannot afford this problem. Thank you. Now I'd like to call on 2 of my constituents to speak to this bill. First, we will hear from Shelley Dunphy, a tenant organizer at 130 Jameson in Parkdale High Park, and then Diana Chan McNally, a community and crisis response worker at All Saints Community Center. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you for having me here today. I've had the privilege of living in the Parkdale community for the past 43 years and in the same building. It's a community that is enriched with diversity and culture and class. A place where once this blueprint was considered an ideal model of what a community looks like. A community is a place where everyone watches out for each other's children. A place where you can knock on your neighbor's door for something you have run out of. Our communities need to be preserved. There is the opportunity now to secure and define what we want our communities to look like in 10 years from now. This is why there is a distressed need to pass the Rent Stabilization Act that the NDP has introduced. Over the past 5 years, we have seen apartments double in rent with minimal upgrades. We see apartments sitting empty for months at a time because families simply cannot afford $2,500 a month for an apartment on top of rising food costs and day-to-day living. We are seeing apartments more often being rented by multiple people because a working person cannot afford to live on their own. There is a huge turnover rate for these apartments, and new neighbors come and go within a couple months. In the past few years, I have watched seniors, people I've known my entire life, sit in tears of fear that they will face evictions because of ongoing attempts to increase their rent for a multitude of factors, whether it's because of a small deep freezer or because they want to use their AC on really hot days. Last month, my senior neighbor of 40 years who feared eviction or additional cost had her air conditioner taken out. And during the last heat wave, it landed her in the hospital because of poor oxygen. When the paramedics showed up, they demanded that she reinstall that air conditioner because the conditions were so hot, but she still refused because of fear. The ongoing threat of not being able to maintain your rent has become constant. And these are people's homes, where people build memories just like everyone else. We need change now. We need to redefine what is considered reasonable. We need definitive expectations and standards for landlords that are treating rental properties strictly as a business, forgetting about the social, economic, and emotional cost it has on people and their communities. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me here today as well. As a community and crisis response worker in Toronto's downtown east side, I see every day the physical, mental, and emotional toll that homelessness takes on the hundreds of people I support every single day. People come from all walks of life, all identities, all forms of mental health barriers, all kinds of relationships to substances, but there is one commonality between all of them. They simply cannot find and afford housing. This is the number one reason why people across Toronto and Ontario become homeless, because housing is often hundreds, even thousands of dollars beyond their financial reach. This is true even for unhoused people who work. And this is true for the many people across Ontario who live on the cusp of homelessness because of suppressed incomes. A too low minimum wage kept well below inflation by the province, and the rates of OW and ODSP that are kept unlivable by Doug Ford. Rents are on the rise, but incomes are not matching. Inflation is through the roof. This makes people at increasing risk of homelessness and remaining so. And it makes homelessness a policy choice. Doug Ford's government is choosing policies that actively make people unhoused. And it simply isn't about building housing. It's not just about supply. It's about preserving affordability of the housing that already exists, particularly rental housing that is accessible and truly affordable for unhoused and very low-income individuals. It means reinstating full rent control, including rent control on units between tenants and closing the loopholes that allow landlords to evict people in order to substantially increase rents. Their profits. Who can afford being evicted and finding out a new apartment costs $200, $500, $1,000 more? Fewer and fewer Ontarians, and through no fault of their own. In Ontario, housing must exist for its intended purpose, to provide people with safety, wellness, and good health, instead of as a means to create extraordinary profit off the backs of renters who have less and less available money. Addressing homelessness requires us to eliminate vacancy decontrol. It requires us to reestablish rent control on units built after November 15th, 2018. And if we don't do this and landlords continue to exploit loopholes, we will never realize the right to housing. We will see more people in shelters, we will see more people on the streets, and we will see more and more people living in parks. It doesn't need to be this way, though. The Ontario NDP's Rent Stabilization Act can and will immediately decrease and prevent future homelessness. It is simple. It is a policy choice. We must choose to make the Rent Stabilization Act law. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone coming and being here today and speaking. I really appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions?
So I wasn't around in 2021 when you guys introduced this, so I'm reading this for the first time. But the lawful rent for a new tenant section, I'm not entirely sure if I'm reading this right, but what I gleaned from it is that the new rent on a previously vacant unit has to be the same rent as the previous. That's correct? So no room for even like a, I don't know, what is it this year, 2.5% increase? The number isn't specific, but the number doesn't matter so much. But so this bill is saying that even on a a new unit, you can't do a landlord couldn't do a small increase.
Well, all units have to follow or follows the guideline increases as set by the province, so it will continue to follow that. However, you cannot make any increases beyond that, which is what is happening right now. So the rent or the rent control measures that we have in the province is tied to the unit as opposed to the person.
It is that form of vacancy control that we are proposing is used in Manitoba and Quebec. And we find in those provinces that rent is upwards of $1,000 cheaper a month compared to Toronto. And both Manitoba and Quebec also have a healthy rate of new construction. It is a myth that vacancy control will limit the construction of new units.
So I guess what do you think does limit the construction of new units?
The NDP has a comprehensive plan to increase housing supply to meet the needs of current and future Ontarians. Our plan includes ending exclusionary zoning to make it easier to build missing middle homes, townhomes, duplexes and triplexes in existing neighbourhoods. That is a very effective way to increase supply. We are also in support of establishing a public builder in order to build non-market housing on public land. Land is the most expensive cost when building new homes. And when we can access provincial land and use a public builder to do it, then we can really increase the supply of affordable housing, which is the real issue in Ontario today.
Sorry, I don't have anything else.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining us. As Bhutila mentioned, we will be introducing the Act and we will be campaigning on this Act to pressure the Ford government to make housing affordable for renters over the 4-year term. Thanks for being here.